Emotion in man, understanding emotional energy. Let me start by introducing myself. My name is Josh Alfred. I'm a cognitive theorist. I've taken classes in psychology online through Berkeley University, and I've been studying emotion, linguistics, the mind, and psychology for nearly 2 years. I would not be delineating emotional capacities in human organisms if I didn't devise my own theory of emotion. My theory of emotion is called cognitive dualism, which can be found in my free book online. The first question we ask is, what is emotion in general? There is conservation of psychic energy within man, which is passed down through reproduction, and its genetic structures determine the emotional capacity of individuals. Emotional potentiality remains intact throughout one's life because of the emotional structures of the brain. The brain gives the mind its emotional functionality. For every positive and negative emotion, there is a positive and negative genetic function permitting for the experience of the emotion. We can observe the genetic causes for all emotion and even harness the ability to adjust the emotional drafts of man or animals through genetic engineering. My theory implies that there is a genetic structure for the processes of cognitive emotional reasoning. Emotion is a cognitive tool or a cognitive experience which tells one if they are aversive or attracted towards certain intentional ends. I argue that all animals with brain can experience emotional arousal to an intensity determined by their phenotype. Emotions are either detrimental or conducive to the bonds of relationships. Emotions affect the degree of intimacy between others. The more negative the emotional association with another person, the more averse one is to having a relationship with them. The more positive the emotional association with another person, the more attracted one is to having a relationship with the other. There are those two kinds of relationships one can have with a person, negative or positive. It is required in evolution for human beings to have relationships with other human beings, and we have emotions to give us a distinction between what relationships are positive or negative for our existence to continue, as it is created by personality and identity. A negative relationship includes a desire for distancing oneself from other, and a positive relationship includes a desire for becoming closer to other. A positive relationship brings out positive emotions, and a negative relationship brings out negative emotions. People cannot be fully separated into single emotional connectivity with other individuals. There is a variety of valence connections one can have with another person as well as with materials. A mixture of negative with positive emotions can impede the existence of the emanation of a positive emotional result, such as a positive relationship. Negative psychic energy can block positive outcomes from happening, and positive psychic energy can block negative outcomes from happening, given that emotion can be used as a reason to further do things. If one uses a negative feeling as a negative reason, they will be unlikely to do something. A negative feeling as a reason can be expressed verbally in the negative. Example, I will not go near her because she angers me. Another example of the emotion in the negative. I will not go near it because it is disgusting. Using emotional reason to express intentions is emotional reasoning and exists in cooperation with positive and negative reasons for acting. There are 4 kinds of emotional association types, with materials, events, people, and self. Emotion can be associated freely as aroused by these 4 phenomenal variables. Likewise, there is a semantic aptitude to express these 4 variables and structures in the brain which must be able to differentiate between them to connect with emotional potential. We can think of energy as a type of being that can be used to structure something. Psychic energy can construct, that is, give structure to one's collective self, made up of interests, relationships, and material bonds. Emotion gives the mind a content for reasoning, approving or disapproving of events as they occur. We can measure emotions' duration and intensity. First, we classify the emotion, identify the emotion, and then register its intensity and experience its duration. Psychological pacifiers are positive emotions that cause relaxation. Psychological pacifiers exist as objects which have emotional charge associated with them. Each object is potentially an emotional object having an emotional charge associated with its existence. its existence. There are also psychological annoyers, which are negative emotions that cause irritation. A negative emotion can be used to cancel something, and positive emotion can be used to affirm something. One can arouse other people into positive feelings to reinforce positive conditioning. One can arouse other people into negative feelings to reinforce the negative conditioning, a deconditioning, or a negative conditioning. This reinforcement I call emotional conditioning. It can be done by a process I call dialectical emotional conditioning, whereby words in the positive or negative are used to reinforce the response. For example, a mother may be happy with a child who gets good grades, and then the child will become conditioned to wanting to make the mother happy, and at the same time the child will make an effort to repeat the adjunct of good grades. The first action becomes subordinate to the second action. Good grades become subordinate to the positive conditioning. Likewise, any conditioning can cause a subordination of behavior. The subordination by reinforcement is a type of authority, and that it can be utilized as a type of authority. And this is thus true to condition someone is to have authority over their behaviors. This authority is a design of behaviors by the means of conditioning a desired response. Since emotion can be aroused, it can be manipulated by reinforcement or conditioning. One can know emotional triggers and use these to gain a response from the organism as desired. The trigger is the independent variable, and the dependent variable is the emotion. I plan to list the emotions of the human being in alphabetical order, cover their anatomical source, their use, the valence, and common triggers for the emotion. Affection, a positive emotion used for reinforcing a positive relationship with something. Physical interaction caused by this emotion includes hugging, standing near, wrapping arms around a person, rubbing the other person, kissing. The higher form of affection is love. Deprived of their mothers, Harlow's monkeys were at times apathetic, at times hyperactive, and given to outbursts of violence. Raised in isolation, they were socially inept. They often held themselves and rocked like autistic children. What Harlow could not know at the time of his dramatic experiments in the late 1950s and the 1960s was that these behavioral disturbances were accompanied by brain damage. More recent studies suggest that during formative periods of brain growth, certain kinds of sensory deprivation, such as lack of touching and rocking by the mother, result in incomplete or damaged development of neuronal systems that control affection. Since the same systems influence brain centers associated with violence in a mutually inhibiting mechanism, the deprived infant may have difficulty controlling violent impulses as an adult. If confirmed, these studies may have profound implications for human cultures that raise their infants with low levels of touching and movement. Children in these societies may be unable to experience certain kinds of pleasure and be predisposed to apathy and violence. Affection can be thought of as caused by positive common denominators in personalities. There is a greater probability of affection potential existing in family relationships. Anger, a negative emotion. It varies in intensity and its expression can be measured in a degree. Passive anger is communication of being angry. It's annoyance, where aggressive anger is communication of threats or ideations of violence. Rage. Anger can be expressed through communication, threats, violence, or fury. Anger varies from annoyance to rage. A new study published in the January Nature Neuroscience suggests that the brain cells in the prefrontal cortex help humans make fast decisions about risky situations. Ralph Adolphs at the University of Iowa and his colleagues studied a volunteer with a healthy prefrontal cortex. Adolph's team showed this man a series of happy, neutral, or unpleasant pictures. At the same time, the scientists snapped pictures of his brain and monitored individual brain cells in the prefrontal cortex. There was no change in the prefrontal cortex when the man viewed happy or neutral scenes, Adolph says, but when the man looked at mutilated bodies, the other images of war, the firing pattern of the cells in the prefrontal cortex changed dramatically. Instead of firing at their regular rate, the brain cells stopped, and then all at once erupted in a rapid-fire message. That signal probably gets sent off before the man realizes he has seen an unpleasant image, Adolph says. Adolphs and others think the prefrontal cortex evolved to give humans a very quick response to danger. The study suggests that damage to these cells could impair their urgent messaging system. The brain cells studied might not send out an alert, or their message might get garbled. Either way, there is no message of fear or emotion to help guide behavior, Aldoff says. Anxiety, also called angst or worry, is a psychological and physiological state characterized by somatic, emotional, cognitive, and behavioral components. The root meaning of the word anxiety is to vex or trouble. In either presence or absence of psychological stress, anxiety can create feelings of fear, worry, uneasiness, and dread. Anxiety is considered to be a normal reaction to a stressor. It may help someone to deal with a difficult situation by prompting them to cope with it. When anxiety becomes too excessive, it may fall under the classification of anxiety disorder. Apathy is a state of indifference or the suppression of emotions. An apathetic individual has an absence of interest or concerns about emotional, social, spiritual, philosophical, or physical life. They may lack a sense of purpose or meaning in their life. He or she may also exhibit insensibility or sluggishness. The opposite of apathy is flow. In positive psychology, apathy is described as the result of individual feeling they do not possess the level of skill required to confront a challenge. It may also be a result of perceiving no challenge at all. In light of the insurmountable certainty of universal doom, apathy is the default mode of existential nihilism, and as such is not considered to be a psychological state by those who experience it. Awe is an emotion comparable to wonder, but less joyous and more fearful or respectful. Awe is defined in Robert Plutchik's Wheel of Emotions as a combination of surprise and fear. One dictionary definition: an overwhelming feeling of reverence, admiration, fear, produced by that which is grand, sublime, extremely powerful, or the like, in awe of God, in awe of a great political figure. Contentment seems realistically defined as enjoyment of whatever may be desired. The definition is realistic because it is more contented an individual or community becomes, the less extreme, so more acceptable the desires will be. Contentment is an intuitive, natural concept, where peace is a civil, so non-intuitive concept dependent on restriction, whereas contentment was and is self-sustaining. Curiosity is an emotion related to natural inquisitive behavior such as exploration, investigation, and learning, evident by observation in human and many animal species. Boredom is an emotional state experienced when an individual is without any work or not interested in their surroundings. Depression is a state of low mood and aversion to activity that can affect a person's thoughts, behaviors, feelings, and physical well-being. Depressed people may feel sad, anxious, empty, hopeless, helpless, worthless, guilty, irritable, or restless. They may lose interest in activities that were once pleasurable, experience loss of appetite or overeating, or problems concentrating, remembering details, or making decisions, and may contemplate or attempt suicide. Hope is an emotional state which promotes the belief in a positive outcome related to events and circumstances in one's life. Despair is to expect or be wrought by negative thinking about things that are saddening. It's a type of sadness. Ecstasy is subjective experience of total involvement of the subject with an object of his or her awareness. Because total involvement with an object or our interest is not our ordinary experience, since we ordinarily are aware also of other objects, ecstasy is an example of an altered state of consciousness characterized by diminished awareness of other objects or total lack of awareness of surroundings and everything around the object. Embarrassment is an emotional state of negativity experienced upon having a socially or professionally unacceptable act or condition witnessed by others or revealed to others. Envy is best defined as an emotion that occurs when a person lacks another's superior quality, achievement, or possession, and either desires it or wishes that other lacks it. Fear is a distressing negative sensation induced by a perceived threat. Its basic survival mechanism occurring in response to stimulus such as pain or threat of danger. The amygdala is a key brain structure in the neurobiology of fear. It is involved in the processing of negative emotions. Researchers have observed hyperactivity in the amygdala when patients were shown threatening faces or confronted with frightening situations. Guilt is a state of being responsible for the commission of an offense. It is also a cognitive or an emotional experience that occurs when a person realizes or believes, accurately or not, that he or she has violated a moral standard and bears significant responsibility for that violation. It is closely related to the concept of remorse. Happiness is a mental state of well-being characterized by positive emotions ranging from contentment to intense joy. Hatred is a deep emotional extreme dislike directed against a certain object or class of objects. The objects of such hatred can vary widely, from inanimate objects to animals, oneself, or other people. Though not necessary, hatred is often associated with feelings of anger and is a disposition towards hostility against the objects of hatred. Horror. The distinction between horror and terror is a standard literary and psychological concept applied especially to Gothic literature and film. Terror is usually described as the feeling of dread and anticipation that precedes the horrifying experience, but contrast horror is the feeling of revulsion that usually occurs after something frightening is seen, heard, or otherwise experienced. Loneliness is an unpleasant feeling in which a person experiences a strong sense of emptiness and solitude resulting from inadequate levels of social relationships. The next one is shock. It's a psychological condition arising in response to a terrifying or traumatic event. Sorrow. An emotion, feeling, or sentiment, sorrow is more intense than sadness. It implies a long-term state. At the same time, sorrow, but not unhappiness, suggests a degree of resignation which lends sorrow its peculiar air of dignity. Surprise. A brief emotional state experienced as the result of an unexpected event. Surprise can have any valence, that is, it can be neutral, moderate, pleasant, or unpleasant. If a person experiences a very powerful or long-lasting surprise, it may be considered shock.